Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm sorry about Friday. Had an emergency over in my family with my dad. And I'm just basically wanting to catch you up on a few things before we meet on Monday, go over a few things that I would have done on Friday. However, it is a little different because what I was planning to do with you was basically to have conversations, which is how I like to teach, through conversations about the readings. And this is obviously not going to be that. It's going to be just me talking about the readings. But I'm going to ask you to do a few things, a couple of activities, writing activities that maybe if you do it before class, if you have time, it will help us to kind of get into our conversations and get through all of the material tomorrow morning. So that's sort of my goal with talking to you today and doing this lecture. So I also might use the screen share feature because I want to talk to you about your assignment, but I have a lot of things open here on my computer on my end. So let me see about doing this. I need to use my brush. Screen share and let's look at the assignment sheet. Okay. So I posted this up. You may have already started looking at it, especially if you're one of the people who is planning to do their presentation this coming week. I don't necessarily need to read this over to you, but I might talk you through it so that I can talk to you about a couple of points that I make and you can hear me sort of say them as I would have done in the class on Friday. So these presentations, as you know, they're meant to allow us to have more encounters with feminist theory and to widen our exposure to different feminist theories in the course, and also to just share the reading load so that you don't all have to read all of the recommended reading. If we're each doing, if you're each doing one, we're sort of doing the sharing. So the presentations are 10% of your grade, but it is kind of an informal presentation. As long as I am going to be able to get the sense that you have done the reading, that you have an understanding of the article, that you sort of prepared in some way for it, and whatever you decide to do in terms of how you use that time, whether it's 15 minutes or a little bit less than that, you can decide. That's up to you. I'm actually gonna tell you a couple of suggestions. I put a couple of suggestions in here. So I don't think I need to read about the presentations because you can do that on your own, but I will go through the logistics. So you have 15 minutes unless you have 4 people going on your day all at the same time, in which case we just won't be able to do that in our 50-minute period. So you'll do a little bit less, maybe like a 10-minute presentation. Now, if you plan something that's longer and you really are excited about it and you love presenting and you want to take more time, that's fine. Just let me know so that we can plan it and I could sort of arrange the time so we have enough time for you. I know that not everyone is super comfortable with presenting, so I do say a couple things about that in the assignment sheet. But basically, your task is to create an interesting and interactive presentation of some kind. So I want to leave that like way open. I want you to do something creative that's within your comfort zone for things. So if you're really nervous, get us involved, get the class involved. If you don't want to be doing so much of a lecture, because you don't like public speaking as much, maybe one solution would be to make a worksheet and pass it around with the basic information and read off the worksheet. Then you won't have to be on the spot talking like I am, like I might do. You'll just kind of have it verbatim with your like bullet points or whatever you want to do, and maybe have like a worksheet where we get to write on something and you get us talking. Having us talk and discuss ideas is a way of taking the pressure off of you in the presentation you're giving and making it more of a communal conversation. And it's also super useful, but really we still need to have the basic components where you're assuming your audience, your classmates have not read the article, and you're getting to basically introduce them to ideas and tell them about it. And it's pretty cool, especially if you're working with an article that you're excited about, which I hope you will be. So I give you a couple of pointers for what I'm looking for. I want you to demonstrate that you have engaged with the material, that you can provide some kind of meaningful synopsis or key points from the article. Again, you can do it scripted as you want if you're nervous. If you're super nervous and you hate presenting and it's just one of the worst things for you, talk to me. Maybe I can help you present. If you prepare materials and you need sort of someone there to kind of help you with the sharing of the materials, I'm totally okay with doing that. I want to be accommodating as long as everyone has done something, shown me that they've read the article, understand the article, and have planned something to do that with the classmates to teach them about it and to let them know about it. So I say you can engage in either a discussion of ideas or a short interactive activity. I really like activities. You'll probably notice that throughout the rest of the course. But discussions are part of, that's pretty much how we're going to talk about all of the articles that we're reading that are the required reading for the course. So it's definitely valuable. But if you can come up with something on your own, that's absolutely fine. So I said you may come into class on presentation day and start your presentation right away with an experiment. So you could actually come into class, not tell, obviously we're going to know the title of your article. So introduce yourself and your title of your article. But then just without telling us about the article, you could jump into an experiment. And I'm going to give an example later of a presentation that I gave in a graduate class a while back, where I sort of did that. And that's why it popped into my head as a possibility for you. And then basically after you do your little experiment, your activity, you tell us about the article, you sort of explain why you did that, and then bring us into a little bit of a conversation about it. And I think your 15 minutes probably will be up by that time. So yeah, you want to be thinking about time and how it's going to break down a little bit. So what else do I say here? You may devise a creative activity, creative writing activity. So again, it doesn't have to be writing. You can demonstrate a point by actually like physically, if an author is trying to sort of give a depiction of something, you can use us. We can act. We can do some, we can sort of like break ourselves off into groups in order to demonstrate a statistic or whatever you want to do. It could be, the sky's the limit there. Some people like to use PowerPoints. I do use them in my classes sometimes, not so often because I just prefer the interaction and not so much the PowerPoint, because you're already reading the article. Like the text is with us. And a lot of times PowerPoints end up just being regurgitation. However, with these articles, your classmates haven't read it. So in that case, the text is not with them. So a PowerPoint might be something that's super helpful for you as a presenter, and it also might be helpful to transmit the information from the article. So I give you 3 basic things during the presentation. Demonstrate you read it, right? I need to know you read and understand this article. Plus you have to read and understand the article for us to be able to read and understand the article and get a little glimpse into it. Introduce the article and help others who haven't read it to understand it. You're giving us the information, you're sharing, your information sharing, you're actually caring for a community in this way. So this is why I like this. It's not so much about like transmitting knowledge, but it is about caring for each other and saying, hey, I did the reading. I know we're all busy. I did this extra reading and I want to tell you about it so that you can kind of take it away with you. And maybe it's an article you're going to want to read later. So you're caring for your classmates by doing the presentation. And then the third point is to do the former 2 tasks interactively. So that's really important. I want these to be interactive. I want us to all get involved. So if I give priority to something, it is that we're going to be doing something when it's your time to present. I want us on the move anytime that we can be on the move. I know like physically we might not be able to do much on the move, but maybe we can. Maybe you'll have us doing something creative where we're actually getting out of our seats or going somewhere or whatever. We can talk to me in advance if we have to leave the room, just so we could plan it, maybe toward the end of the class. Okay, but you really want, this is the really important part. You want the interactive portion of the presentation to demonstrate how theory and concepts and practices or actions are connected in the article you read, which actually connects really, really well with the bell hooks article, actually a chapter in this book, Teaching to Transgress, Theory as Liberatory Practice, because basically the main argument and the intervention on feminist theory that bell hooks makes in this article is that theory is practice. And not everyone's going to say that. And also bell hooks is not saying that all forms of theory are, are practice, but that theory has the potential, when it's being done right, essentially, to be a form of action and practice. And we're going to look more closely at some of those passages, either while I'm talking to you in this little mini lecture or tomorrow in class. This is probably, bell hooks work is closest to my heart in life. It as a theory, this bell hooks work has been the most transforming of how I operate in the world and in the classroom, and how I see connection between all the things that I do. So when I'm here in my household and I'm in my bedroom, this is my bedroom, this is where my desk is. I'm sitting at my desk. When I'm here with my family, and then when I'm with you in the classroom, when I'm out in the grocery store, when I'm with my daughters, I reading this sort of transformed how I see all of it as connected. And I think it's feminist theory that did that transformation in me. And reading bell hooks work, the reason I put it here in the first week of the class is because it introduces a form of feminist theory that is, I think, foundational and really important. And I want our whole course to be grounded in this. So this article, Theory as Liberatory Practice, is basically going to be, and then your grandmother calls you in the middle of your class. It's basically going to be the foundation of everything we do. So we're going to spend some good time with it, and we're going to come back to the ideas of it. And if we let those ideas sink into us deeply enough, and we start practicing it, and it becomes our embodied practice during the course, whatever else we encounter, great, it's awesome. But that alone is something that you'll walk away from this class with, and you'll be transformed in some way. Whether you identify with feminist theory, identify as a feminist or not. I think that, bell hooks wrote a book called, I think Feminism is for Everyone. And you'll feel that love in her work. So I do want you to demonstrate how theory and practice and action are like addressed, if they are at all, in the article you read, and where you see them. And maybe you'll show us that. So maybe it won't be like, hey, I'm going to have this talk right now, and I'm going to tell you about how, here's the theory and here's the practice. Maybe it's not like that. Maybe you have us do an activity that shows us how the theory applies and shows us sort of the theory in action. And that would be, actually, it's a great segue for something I want you to do as a little bit of an assignment before you come to class tomorrow morning. So this is not a formal assignment. This would be an in-class assignment. In-class assignments are things that I will collect and give you credit for doing, but they are not things that I'm giving you marks for. It's just something I give you credit for on our participation and for your participation grade, but you get just credit for whatever you put. So I'm going to build it in, even though I'm in the middle of sort of talking to you about the assignment sheet, but I think it fits right here because I started to talk about bell hooks. And can I make this bigger? All right, I'm taking my whole screen. So the beginning of the article is really important. Theory as liberatory practice begins with, I came to theory because I was hurting. The pain within me was so intense that I could not go on living. I came to theory desperate, wanting to comprehend, to grasp what was happening around and within me. Most importantly, I wanted to make the hurt go away. I saw in theory then a location for healing. This is it. This is probably the most important thing from this chapter, is the way that she begins it. Because she's relocating and locating theory in the body, theory as being a response to pain, and theory as action that is healing, and that sort of heals pain. So I think that this is a really great way for thinking about feminist theory, and it gives purpose to feminist theory. And it's also something that we can all relate to in some way. So bell hooks is opening feminist theory up to anyone who suffers or has suffered as a path, as an intellectual an embodied and agential path toward healing. And I think that it's the kind of healing that's like a justice healing, for things to be repaired, for things to improve, for things to get better. That is how things heal, rather than when we think about healing, we often will think about like medical healing, spiritual healing. And I think it's not unconnected from spiritual healing. But I think that when we're thinking about it in the context of feminist theory, then we're thinking about like revolutionary action as sort of healing. So healing's in a different way. And I want you to be thinking about what that means, what that could mean. And we're going to talk about that when we come into class on Monday. I want you to use this prompt, and maybe I will also write it. Well, I can't because I'm just going to be putting this up on YouTube, but I want you to use her first line from the book. I came to theory because I was hurting. And I want you to write your own statement. Like you could think about, I came to theory as I came to feminist theory, the class, or I came to feminist theory. Either way is fine. But I want you to use the phrase, I came to theory because. Okay, now you can either do two things here. Actually, you can do anything. Just start with, I came to theory because. And where does that lead you? Just free write. This is what I want you to do before tomorrow. I want you to free write whatever comes to mind after I came to theory because. If you want to keep going with Bell Hooks's line, I came to theory because I was hurting, and then talk about any kind of suffering in your life, I think that's a really great way to approach it. And you can, I want you to like listen to your body, listen to your emotions, and listen to the way the article has affected you. And think about like what in you needs healing, because that is where Bell Hooks is locating feminist theory and its purpose and where it should come from. So I want us all to sort of try this as, you know, like it could be right in the moment. Like I came to theory because I was curious, and you change it and you talk about what you're curious about. You need something. You took the course for a reason. Now, if you came to feminist theory class because you needed a GGS credit and you had no prior interest in feminist theory or whatever, okay, that's fine. But don't go in that direction for this assignment. I'm asking you to try to go, having read this chapter, I'm asking you to try to go a little bit deeper emotionally. So like, what do you think what do you want to gain from feminist theory? Having read your first 3 articles for the course, you should have probably had some kind of emotional, some kind of intellectual impact from those articles. They made you think. They made you think about different parts of your life, different parts of your inner experience and your emotions. Go to that place and write a statement. And you can use I came to theory because, or you can use I am coming to theory because, or I come to theory because. Use either one of those 3 prompts, past or present, and just write a short feminist statement describing how you're coming to theory. Maybe you want to say instead of I came to theory because, you say I came to theory with having a past of this, or a baggage of this, or having, you know, experienced depression in some way, or having, you know, experienced something with someone I love. I want you to find the place where you come to theory. So it's like, where is that place for you? Is it a place, we all suffer, so we could all try to think about this in terms of the hurting. Where is it that we hurt? What has caused us to hurt? Because Bell Hooks goes on here, doesn't stop there, but gives us an example of the very thing that she is trying to teach us, and brings us into her past, this memory of being punished. She says, I tried in childhood to compel folks around me to do things differently, to look at the world differently, using theory as intervention, as a way to challenge the status quo. I was punished. So I love that she goes back to childhood, because we often think of feminist theory as a thing that academics do. And all 3 of the articles that we read for class, they challenge this idea that feminist theory is something that's strictly an academic endeavor, or that should be limited to the academy. In fact, they're going against that grain in different ways and with different methods of doing so. And bell hooks goes to inner experience, emotional experience, and trauma, and the child and the inner child. That's where she goes. She tells us a story about basically being criticized by her mom, and challenging patriarchal norms in her household that sort of alienated her and made her mother feel like she was, she was challenging those patriarchal norms in a way that was bothersome to her mother, and that hurt her. That was a place of deep hurt. She saw injustices in the world and in her life, and she felt the effects of them in her heart. So for the assignment I just gave you, which is short, a paragraph is fine. That's all that she wrote at the beginning there. Or if you want to tell a longer story, do it. Whatever it means to you, whatever space you need to do to explore with the prompt that I gave you, that bell hooks gave you, use that. Maybe tell a story. If you're having trouble thinking about a statement of, I came to theory because, or a statement of finding your suffering, think about childhood memories. Do you relate to the story that bell hooks shared? Because what's really interesting is that she uses Terry Eagleton's quote about children making the best theorists since they have not been educated into accepting our routine social practices. So I think this is a pedagogical kind of idea, but I'm really with it too. Since children do not yet grasp our social practices as inevitable, they do not see why we might not do things differently. So it's all about possibilities. And I like how bell hooks is defining feminist theory as this practice of questioning, this practice of coming up with different ways of doing things, different ways of knowing things, different ways of analyzing, understanding, different ways of interacting with the world. But it starts with questioning. And that's what she shows us, is herself as a child questioning and being punished for questioning. She writes, and these were hard to read and they're sad. It is sad, but all of us probably have experienced something in childhood where we were hurt when we were trying to propose something different. And not everyone is a child like bell hooks, or maybe a child like me. Like I was constantly challenging my parents and my family, and I was judging everyone, and I was trying to like uproot the authority in my family. So think about how you were in your family dynamics and where you grew up. She writes, it must have seemed to them that some monster had appeared in their midst in the shape and body of a child, a demonic little figure who threatened to subvert and undermine all they were seeking to build. So then she goes into, imagine then, if you will, my childhood pain. And that's the sort of place, because as a child, she may not have been able to solve the problems, but she was trying to. She saw a problem and she wanted to solve it, and she wanted to change it, and she wanted to be an actor in change. So in saying all of this, I kind of like, I put my interpretation here, but she says theory is an intervention. So she was trying to intervene upon her household and maybe had not so great of luck doing so and was punished for it. But the point is that you're walking away as thinking about feminist theory as interventions upon the way that things are, because the way things are is not always the way things should be. And we can tune into our own sense of morals and justice and ethics to imagine different possibilities for the world as children do, and as we can do. It's also about advocating for the self, advocating for others, and advocating for change, because I saw that in what I saw in the description of her as a child. That's what she was trying to do. She was self-advocating and punished for it. So these are things that the story of her childhood was able to sort of unpack. And this is feminist theory. This is what I love about starting with this, because we see that bell hooks is saying, feminist theory doesn't have to be a gatekeeping device that is written in jargonistic language that keeps people out, and that just serves to advance certain people, white men and women in the academy. But no, Feminist theory root is stories. It's our stories that we interpret and analyze and use. You know, that is our action. The stories are themselves forms of activism. So I think that's an important point to take away from the beginning of this. So go ahead and please do that activity. Please do the writing prompt. I come to theory, but also like think about all the things that you read in this chapter too. It's a beautiful piece of feminist theory that I hope will stay with you throughout the rest of the course and your lives. Another point about this with the childhood and the example that she gives is that she experienced alienation. So maybe explore the theme of alienation in your own life, either with this little assignment that we're doing, or maybe in one of the later assignments. I am going to have you do a personalist political essay where you're going to tell a story about your life and kind of talk about how, like, do sort of what Bell Hooks is doing, where you interpret the story through a feminist analytic lens as a contribution toward theory. That's what the assignment's going to be about. So maybe if you're thinking about now, or maybe this prompt will end up being your rough draft or your start of your draft for what you'll end up doing for that assignment later in the semester. So Bell Hooks here is searching for belonging and home, and that search for belonging and home, fairness and justice, those are all part of her theory and of the goals of theory as well. What else did I write over here that I wanted to make sure I shared? Oh, okay. So she writes and she uses, I wanted to talk about the method here of writing, because while you're reading these articles, and they're all done very differently, the article by Lugones and Spellman is a different kind of formatting. It's a different kind of methodology. And that is something that we're going to talk about. If I don't talk about it today, because I'm already going to end up talking forever. I don't even know when I started this, and I don't know how long it's been going. But if I don't end up talking about it in this video, I will, hopefully we'll talk about the formatting of the article in and of itself, because it's political. It's done purposefully, it's done theoretically, and it's discussed in the article why it is that way. So I like how the form of the theory is reflective of the theory itself, which again kind of just points us toward that connection between theory and practice, that theory is not just words, it's format. It's the way we do research. It's the way we think. It's the way we interact with other people. It's the way we write. It's the way we speak. It's the way we tell stories. Bell Hooks says, I found a place of sanctuary in theorizing, in making sense out of what was happening. So again, another definition she gives you of what theorizing is. In this case, we're going to be talking about all sorts of definitions of what theorizing is. Making sense out of what was happening. So that's analysis. So in this definition, it's really interesting, because we can think now, when we hear theory, it sounds like such a scary word, but if we think about theory as analysis with purpose, as making sense, as making meaning, all of those things make it seem a lot less scary, what we're doing. I found a place, this is on page 61, I found a place where I could imagine possible futures, a place where life could be lived differently. This lived experience of critical thinking, of reflection and analysis, because a place where I worked at explaining the hurt and making it go away. This is all part of sort of giving you a definition of what theory is: critical thinking, reflection, and analysis. And it's not always going to look the same. It's going to look very different, but keep those components in when you're trying to think about, what definitions we're working with here. So just as it is about creating meaning and making sense out of things, it's also rethinking meaning. So a lot of meanings already around us. We grow up being told, this is what this means. This is what this means. This is who you are. This is what life is about. Patriarchal norms, that's a whole universe of meaning that we're brought into. We have to rethink those meanings. That's what feminist theory allows us to do. It is responsory. It is responding to the meanings that are already insisted upon in the world, that we want to say, hey, that's causing pain for people. That's causing problems. That's not really working. That's not fair. Let's rethink it. It's also about remembering. So all of these memories that Bell Hooks weaves into this theory, into this practice of theory, are things that she's inevitably thought about in other parts of her life during her life. And just a reminder, Bell Hooks is no longer with us. She died very recently. I hope someone chooses Bell Hooks as their theorist for the theorist presentations that we're doing for class, just because I love Bell Hooks so much. And I want you to learn. I'm not going to be doing introductions to the theorists because we're doing that project. But she has all of these lived experiences that are forms that allow for theorizing, and they become theorizing when she remembers them and applies that making sense and applies that analysis and that critical thinking, all toward the goal of healing, finding that place of pain. And I think I highlighted this quote that I wanted you to have as well on page 61. When our lived experience of theorizing is fundamentally linked to processes of self-recovery, of collective liberation, no gap exists between theory and practice. This is the big one. This is the big quote. In fact, save this quote, because multiple papers that you're doing later in the semester, this might be a big part of it. Again, repeat that. No gap exists between theory and practice. So Bell Hooks is coming in, and this is in, I think, 1994, this was published, about 10 years after Lugones and Spellman published Have We Got a Theory for You? Feminist Theory, Cultural Imperialism, and the Demand for the Woman's Voice. 1994 is a ways away. I was 10 years old at that time. But then the discussion around the relationship between theory and practice is happening. So remember, Bell Hooks is not writing this in a vacuum. This isn't just coming to Bell Hooks. And why is Bell Hooks talking about theory and practice? Well, because a lot of feminists at the time were disagreeing about theory and practice. And that came out of the sort of academizing, or I don't know, like that's a word that's probably not a word, or it is a word because I'm saying it, but it's the academy's sort of hold on feminist theory at the time that is described actually in Have We Got a Theory for You, which is interesting if you think about these articles in relation to one another. So here Lugones and Spellman are saying we have a problem because, you know, and Bell Hooks also says this, like people are meeting and gathering because they want change. And some people are feeling excluded. And those exclusions are what lead to a lot of this work. So people are gathering in spaces and they're not welcoming to everyone. And some people are sitting there and saying, you're using language that's excluding me, or I don't care about all this talk, right? The example that Bell Hooks gave us later is that she was criticized, you know, that feminist theory was criticized by someone who said, let's do things. I'm interested in doing stuff. I don't want to just talk about it. And that's where this comes from as well, because Bell Hooks basically says, and that's a little bit later on, like, wait a minute, no, these words are actions. These words, that theorizing is important, but there's validity to the complaint that originated this conversation. So yes, exclusion is what people feel with the jargon. But we can make it's not that you get rid of talking all in and of itself, because talking is action. It is a form of action, and organizing is a form of action. So we're going to come back to that. And I really want to hear what you have to say when we're in class together. But go back to this quote on page 61, where I said no gap, where Bell Hooks says no gap exists between theory and practice. Indeed, what such experience makes more evident is the bond between the two, that ultimately reciprocal process wherein one enables the other. So I want you to sort of think about this ongoing relationship of theory and practice as sort of being always together. This is the feminist theory that Bell Hooks has created for us, and that we can sort of live by. Theory is not inherently healing. Another important point. So while we start out saying that theory can be healing, it's really important to say that, you know, just because not all theory is going to be healing or revolutionary, she writes. It fulfills this function only when we ask that it do so and direct our theorizing toward this end. So this is why, I mean, this is how I built this course, because I want for theory for you as a class and for all of us to have that healing and revolutionary potency and meaning. So we need to be asking it to do so. That's why I introduced it the way that I did. That's why I'm going to continue doing that. And that's also why we're going to interact with the writing differently than maybe we would if I'm just saying, okay, well, everyone, I'm going to talk to you about Bell Hook's work. This is what the article says. This is what it's about. Here are some questions that, it's not going to be like that. I want to know how you feel about what you're reading. I want to know about the places in your life that this speaks to. That's where that writing assignment comes into play. It's to put you in touch with that place and those meaningful things in your world, in your life, and experiences that connect with what Bell Hooks is writing, that connect with the theory. Because when you start to interact with the theory this way, that is personal and deep to you, that is where, according to Bell Hooks, liberatory, revolutionary theorizing, healing theorizing can happen. A couple other notes I made here to share with you, to remember that theorizing is making sense of what has happened, what is happening, and also imagining futures, imagining futurity, imagining that a different kind of living, a different kind of interacting, something better, something more fair exists. So all of that is part of theory making. And your stories, your lives, your feelings, they are part of the work that you're going to do when you read these articles. So being present and thinking about what you're feeling while you're reading the articles, and thinking about what you're reminded of and those associations you have and just thoughts that cross your mind, all of that, that's like valid and important part. That isn't a valid and important part of the scholarly work of analysis that we're doing. And it comes from a feminist theoretical, like a feminist theory-based pedagogy, I guess I could call it. So my pedagogy in this class is a form of feminist theory in practice, and a form of feminist practice, you could say. Okay. I really wanted to bring up another activity that I want to do. I think I'm going to save that for class. It's about the oral tradition and oral narratives. I might give you a little bit of a glimpse of it. I do want you to do the writing for I came to theory, or I came to theory because, so please have that done. But the other thing that we're going to talk about is we're going to go to page 63 to talk about the return to oral narratives, which are often dismissed and have been dismissed in the academy. And I have an activity for us to do in class around the oral narrative that is based on work that I do with a memoir writing workshop that I lead, that I co-facilitate. And it's a partnership between an organization called Herstory Writers Workshop and the organization that I am the co-founder of, Mad Women in the Attic. And I've been leading this workshop for, actually I think next week we're on our 1-year anniversary. The workshop is titled Memoirs to Reimagine Mental Health Care. It is held on Thursdays. It is 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If any of you, in addition to doing all the work for this class, of course, is interested in memoir writing and writing your stories and just doing a little bit of that work, and has experience with mental health care, anything related to the system of mental health care, and you want to join, please join us. We have a pretty big group. We have a lot of students from Stony Brook University who are part of the Humanities Institute, and they're doing an internship with us. So you could join right in with them. You wouldn't be required to come any week, but you could come and see what we're doing, and I would love to see you. But I'm going to ask you to do an activity that we do as part of the workshop. And the workshop is an oral or verbal method based on sharing stories verbally before you write them. So it is a writing workshop, and we do writing and we share writing, but the method that we use is the Herstory method. And the Herstory method is based on oral narrative sharing. And so it really kind of speaks, I think, that I'm like, oh, wow, I see echoes of bell hooks work, the feminist theory of bell hooks in this Herstory method, even though it's sort of unacknowledged. Like if you go to the Herstory Writers Workshop website, you're not going to see anything about bell hooks necessarily, but I see the echoes of bell hooks and this article in what we're doing. So I'm going to ask you this phrase. I'm going to throw it out there now. Don't do the writing. Don't do it as writing, because it's not something that we're going to write about now. We're going to do it as an oral exercise in class, hopefully tomorrow, if we have time. And I want you to be thinking about this phrase. If your words had the power, if your words had the power to do anything, what would they do? This line is a line that we use in the Herstory method, but it also connects with bell hooks because it gives agency to language. It also recognizes that language in our storytelling are practices. So it's the theory as practice example. When I first did the workshop, I was going through the facilitator training. So I was becoming a Herstory facilitator. And when I was asked that, if my words had the power, what would I do? And this can change all the time. Ask yourself it every day. If I wake up in the morning and they say, oh, if my words had the power to do anything today, what would it be? It's going to be different every day. But when I did the facilitation workshop, I think I said, if my words had the power to do anything, I would want them to, or they would change the way that people see what we now call mental illness. It would transform sort of, if my words had the power, it would be to help people fear people with mental health issues less. So like when I want a transformation of society so that when someone encounters someone who is hearing voices, the first thing wouldn't be for them to feel fear about it, or to assume that violence is going to be linked with it, or if someone hears someone saying something very strange, that we wouldn't have these fear responses. However, there's a long history of why people might have the fear responses. That's outside of it just being, hey, it's abnormal, therefore I fear it, which is I always see this as an evolutionary response. Like you're out in, if we're sort of like thinking about our primitive selves, if we're out in the woods and something we don't know comes up, or we encounter something we don't know, it could be potentially dangerous for us. So having the fear response is there to protect us, right? Oh, I see a mushroom there, but I've never seen that one before, right? I better be careful, because if I eat that mushroom, maybe it's going to kill me. Is it the kind I can eat or not? So there's like this really instinctual, basic human fear response that protects. But then there's also the fear response that is something that we can reshape. So I think if my words had the power, I would sort of reshape some of those fear responses to people who are labeled with psychiatric illnesses and disorders. I would also convince people to care enough about people who are in mental health institutions that they would want to see change within those institutions to better the conditions and make them less like prisons. So I would have a little bit of an abolitionist, I guess, if an abolitionist purpose with my words of the power. And that's just one. If my words had the power, like today, if my words could do anything, they would convince someone I love that I've not seen in years to, not be afraid to talk to me again, or something like that, right? Maybe it's that. I want you to think about that phrase. Don't write anything down, but have it in your mind, because I'm going to bring it up again when we're in class together tomorrow. Okay. What else do I want to say about bell hooks? There is so much to say, so maybe I should save some of this for tomorrow. But I do know that we have a lot to talk about. So no matter what I say, I'm going to still have more, and you're going to have a lot to say tomorrow. So I want to also, I'm using this video as a way for me to say things that I need to say to you about the readings, but also that will make space tomorrow for you to say what you want to say about the readings and what you felt and all of that, as well as sharing I came to theory because those statements. So I want to make space for that by sort of getting out there what I want you to know through this video. Maybe I'll have to do this in the future as well, making videos. I don't have a ton of time. I'm super busy, but the video might be a good way for me to get in some lecturing kinds of things that maybe we won't have time to do in class. And then you can watch it within your own time, and it'll just sort of be like a little added thing, and hopefully it won't be boring. Okay. What did I highlighted this and I started and I want you to know it. I want you to pay attention to it. I wanted to talk about it with you. 64, bottom of 64. Hence, any theory that cannot be shared in everyday conversation cannot be used to educate the public. So it starts with this. There are so many settings in this country where the written word has only slight visual meaning, where individuals who cannot read or write can find no use for a published theory, however lucid or opaque. Hence, any theory that cannot be shared in everyday conversation cannot be used to educate the public. So I'm really a believer in making our classrooms more accessible, although I'm an imperfect practitioner of it. I told you that on the first day of class. So it's something that I'm always working to be better at. But I think that, when we think about accessibility here, we can think about disability justice, which we're going to be talking about later in the semester. But we also think about disability scholars. But guess what? A lot of that too, thinking about accessibility, we're getting that right here in this 1994 book of feminist theory. So, I think that we need to sort of see sometimes where these practices are connected to theories. And then that helps us to see how the theories really are practices. They were all along. So it's just really helpful and wonderful to see that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what was this like so many years ago that this was written, but this is what I'm still trying to live out in my life, live out in my as an educator today. Another important point from this book is sort of at the bottom of 65. The section on feminist circles and hegemonic feminist theory as being a problematic form of feminist theory that Bell Hooks is responding to with her feminist theory in this book. But I think that what this section sort of tells us to do, and I'm going to read it a little bit and then I'm going to talk about it. Within feminist circles, many women have responded to hegemonic feminist theory that does not speak clearly to us by trashing theory, and as a consequence, further promoting the false dichotomy between theory and practice. Hence, they collude with those whom they would oppress. This is something I wanted to ask you about. So if anyone wants to talk about it in class, bring it up tomorrow. The point here is that, so yes, hegemonic feminist theory is a problematic. Bell Hooks is not saying it's not. But Bell Hooks is also saying that throwing feminist theory away completely is not the answer to that. In fact, that just colludes with, the hegemonic feminist theory, because it lays it in the hands of the few that are part of that sort of circle of theory, instead of like staying the course and saying, no, we're going to write theories. We're going to still be part of this, but we're going to write different theories and we're going to change the way theory is done. I think that the way to handle this, and I wrote a little note below that says, pay attention to power. I sort of see this as the way that we can see whether we're engaging in hegemonic feminist theory, where like we're sort of like advancing the self. And that's, Lugones and Spellman address this too. This is a white woman's feminist theory problem. And so as a white woman, I definitely pay attention to it. And in this article, we're sort of, brought into that example that Bell Hooks is mentioning of the hegemonic feminist theory, where who is benefiting from this theory? Why are you engaging in theory? These questions really matter. And they're important for white people who are engaging in feminist theory to really be thinking about. Who is it benefiting? Is this for my own self-advancement? Is this for my career advancement? Those are not good reasons to be doing it. Who does it benefit? How is it benefiting me? How am I interacting with others? And we're gonna look through the whole framework that they set up in that article tomorrow in class. But we get started on that conversation here with Bell Hooks and the pushback between communities. So if we think about bell hooks with this example of that she gives of conversations happening at the time around whether Black leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, whether we should have, whether feminist critique should be involved in that. Like this was an example of a timely conversation that ended up informing this theory that bell hooks was writing. She writes on 66, I felt that we were engaged in a process of critical dialogue and theorizing that has long been taboo. So sort of a justification for why we need theory in those spaces. Hence, from my perspective, we were charting new journeys, claiming for ourselves as Black women an intellectual terrain where we could begin the collective construction of feminist theory. So bell hooks is talking about what it is like at that time to be engaging in Black feminist theory and to be bringing feminist critiques into Black community spaces, and her sort of exploration of what that is. On the following page, this is another important page that is related to words as action and words as practice, which is the main intervention and the main theory of this article. So in the middle of the page, I like what she writes here, and I think it's really important. Actually, this whole section is really important. So take a good look at it. She calls these risks to one's sense of self. She says, these risks to one's sense of self now seem trite when considered in relation to the crises we are facing as African Americans, to our desperate need to rekindle and sustain the flame of Black liberation struggle. And then lower below, saying, I dare to speak. Saying in response to the suggestion that we were just wasting our time talking, that I saw our words as an action, that our collective struggle to discuss issues of gender and Blackness without censorship was subversive practice. So then again, this is where one of those big moments of theory as practice. Lower down, I insisted that we needed new theories rooted in an attempt to understand both the nature of our contemporary predicament and the means by which we might collectively engage in resistance that would transform our current reality. This is where the production of theory as a social practice can be liberatory. So let that sink in. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to collectively engage in resistance that could transform our current reality? Are you already doing things that do that? Are you already writing things that do that? How might you in the future of this course? Okay, there is so much in this. I mean, the entire article is beautiful and so meaningful, but I want to go to page 70 with you. It's the second paragraph. And reflecting on my own work in feminist theory, I find writing theoretical talk. Okay, so writing as theoretical talk. And I like this because it opens the gates to theory for you to see writing that way, to be most meaningful when it invites readers to engage in critical reflection and to engage in the practice of feminism. So this course, in addition to having you read feminist theory, it's also doing what bell hooks has asked us to do, to write. And to, when we write, invite others to engage in critical reflection. How can we write in a way that invites others to engage in critical reflection? That's just a question I sort of want to leave you with. And we can talk about whatever else you want to talk about when we are together tomorrow. So what I have not brought up that you thought of, that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. I also, I'm going to leave this reading on page 74 and 75 at the end of the article. It's another activity that I have for us to do. I don't know when we can do it. But it's about naming our pain. And I think that this is an important part. So I might start with it tomorrow, and I'm not sure. Maybe I'll save that. I'll kind of end there. I like that, the end of this article, always if you're looking for, something that's going to stay with you, the beginning and the ends of articles, that's a really good reading practice to refocus on those. If you feel like you read a whole article and you're just still a little lost on it, go to the beginning and the ends of the articles to reaffirm what they want you to really start with and take away. Often what they start with is also what they want you to take away. a theorist or a writer in general. But bell hooks ends the article with Catherine McKinnon's quote, saying, Catherine McKinnon reminds us that, quote, we know things with our lives and we live that knowledge beyond what any theory has yet theorized, end quote. Hooks writes, making this theory is the challenge before us, for in its production lies the hope of our liberation. In its production lies the possibility of naming all our pain, of making all the hurt go away. The final line of this chapter, there will be no gap between feminist theory and feminist practice. Yay. I know, I mean, bell hooks is such a powerful writer. And the Catherine McKinnon quote is really important. Also, just a little bit of a side note here. If you're looking for a feminist theorist, as we're reading these, you're going to be reading the works of feminist theorists. So yes, bell hooks is one that you could do your archival project on. But hey, you encounter the names of other feminist theorists that are quoted in the work of feminist theorists that you're reading. So we're not actually reading it. I don't believe we're reading anything by Catherine McKinnon, but Catherine McKinnon might be someone that you want to check out and do a project on if this quote is really going to speak to you. We know things with our lives and we live that knowledge beyond what any theory has yet theorized. I sort of want to end with that quote with you as well, because your life knowledge, your experience, the things that you've lived, that's knowledge that you have that is part of this class. That is part of the theorizing you will do and the way that you'll interact with theory. And it's legitimate and it's valid and it's important. So I sort of just want to end there with that. I might save Lugones and Spellman for tomorrow, because I think that now that I'm doing this video, we're going to have time to catch up on things. So I might allow you to sort of, I have questions for our discussion, but I might allow you to sort of lead the discussion on this article. And also, I think you're going to have a lot to say on this article by Brianna Suslovic, Academia Accessibility Being Spoken For. I picked these for a reason. I obviously picked both of these for the content and the way of kind of entering you into feminist theory and making us think about problems that frameworks for feminist theory that are really important. I also included Suslovic's work because I wanted someone who's doing recent feminist writing, feminist thought to come into the conversation at the beginning of the course too. So we're not thinking about this as a survey from the past to present. We're thinking about how all these ideas are connected. So what I'm really interested when we come into class tomorrow and finding out from you is, obviously what speaks to you in each of these articles, what sense are you making from it? What are these methodologies that they're using? But when you read this, did you hear any echoes from bell hooks' work? Did you hear any echoes from Lugones and Spellman? What echoes between these articles are you hearing? Okay, back to the assignment sheet. I'm going to screen share again. Yeah. No. Nothing to it. No, I don't need to open that up. Where in the world? Okay, that is not what I want. And did I just close it? Okay, there we go. So I think you have the basics, but I wanted to just talk to you a little bit more. I give you some recommendations for preparing for your presentation here. Some people want a little bit of extra guidance. I also say in this section that if you are struggling in any way, please talk to me and I'll try to help you, run ideas by me, that's fine. We also have the GGS help desk, which I put up on UB Learns the other day. You can go during those hours if you're free. We have someone, Sam from GGS, and they're awesome and they're super brilliant and they will be so helpful to you if you decide to go. So I really recommend it. Also, you could just run through your presentation with them if you're nervous and you want a little extra support. I give you the basic criteria. that I'll be using for the grading and what I'm looking for. And I think that's it. But I also wanted to tell you a little bit about a presentation I gave in one of my graduate classes. So we were basically asked to pick an article and to lead. Now, the difference here is that I was leading the article for the whole class, like for the whole class period. You're doing this for 10 to 15 minutes for your presentation. But when I gave my presentation, I gave the presentation for the entire class. So it was basically like teaching a whole class period. So there will be a little bit of a difference there. But I wanted to start out by saying, I thought I had it out. Here it is. I did use a PowerPoint for this, but it wasn't everything. So actually I sort of used the PowerPoint, but it was kind of like a background. What I did, I read an article called No Kisses is Like Yours. And the full title here is Bringing Karen Hansen's No Kisses is Like Yours, an erotic friendship between two African-American women during the mid-19th century into the present. So the article's title is No Kisses is Like Yours, an erotic friendship. Okay, got that part. I take this title and I add bringing and into the present because I'm doing something with the article. That is what I sort of planned. I came up with this is my lesson plan essentially that I'm telling you about. I wanted to take this article that focuses on love letters between two African-American women in the mid-19th century in a class that was a queer theory class. And I wanna sort of like bring us into the mode of that relationship that we read about in the article. I couldn't light candles in class because obvious reasons of fire hazard, but I brought in like little electric candles and I lit them. I turned off the lights. I lit the little electric candles. I turned on some kind of classical music, and I had this in the background. And I'm trying to recall what I did. Oh, I brought in books from my bookshelf. And I've done this in my sexuality and cultures class, but with a different purpose. But what I did is I had an activity basically, and I brought personal books from my own personal bookshelf. So if I thought about my purpose for doing that, it was based in the article because we were reading, the article was about it's just like heating up suddenly. It can't handle the PowerPoint. Come on. The pedagogical justification for that is that I was sort of trying to mimic the intimacy. I wanted us as a class to feel, to experience a sort of intimacy and love that the writers were espousing in their letters to one another. And so I sort of tried to create a non-classroom, a more intimate classroom environment. And then the books that were coming were from my own personal collection, which also added a personal element to pedagogical thing, because actually some of the books had like log notes in them and things like that, like inscribed in the inside, like they were really personal. Books are personal. And you can see from just like, seeing my notes on the pages that I have a habit, well, unless it's a really fancy book, I have a habit of marking up books, unless they're old and they're falling apart and I don't want to hurt them. Not that marking up a book's hurting it, but so I brought in these books and I asked them to browse them, to look at their names. I had them basically, I'm trying to remember, I had this whole lesson plan. Okay, so I asked them to like kind of pass around the books and to take a look at them. I asked them what they had in common. I asked them who was missing. This is the interactive part. They don't know, they read the article. So your classmates won't have read the article. So you've got to eventually give them some more information, but we were going to be leading into a discussion. I included a little bit of a clip here of a film where the women in this article were featured or discussed in some way. This picture is not the picture of the women in the article, but mid-century photography covering sort of like LGBTQ people and African-American LGBTQ people in the mid-century is like sort of the topic of this. Oh, what did I called it? Okay, hold on. I used some of the language of the the article and the video with this bosom talk 101 that I came up with, which was a play on some of the language of the article. And we were reading this as queer theory. So we were reading this article about these love letters, and we were reading the love letters themselves as queer theory. And that's what I was asking us to do. And also because I was trying to clear time in my pedagogical practice, I was trying to bring the love letters into the present. I had everyone write a love letter in the class to someone. Obviously, we were not going to share the love letters, but we wrote love letters on pieces of paper that I think I handed out. So we were engaging in the practice of writing love letters while also engaging with the materiality of these love letters between these two women, and then reflecting upon some of the things. And I also read lines from the love letters from each of the women to each other as part of sort of creating that mood. But by reading these and performing these and asking others to perform the readings of these love letters, it was bringing them into the present. So the love between these women that was felt in exchange in their letters, here we are almost in a, I guess I could say it like a seance situation, or like an incantation of reading their love letters aloud and breathing life in the present into those love letters from the past. That was sort of a queer theory practice. And it was playing with time. So I did a lot of this with these, I had them read these quotes, and I tried to ask them to do it with feeling, to sort of do justice to the love between the women in reading this. What a pleasure it would be to me to address you, my husband. I mean, it just, with everything else that was going on and how I had it arranged, every single person I think ended up reading one of these. They were it was a smaller class than ours. Trying to think of anything else I did. I think, oh, it is time to write a bosom letter. Okay, so the bosom letter is what the theorist ends up characterizing their love letters to each other as, or perhaps they did. No, I think they did. They characterized it. It's been a while. I just doing this as an example to give you a creative example for your presentation. But I asked everyone to write a bosom letter. And I also asked them to pretend they were in the past when they did it. I also asked them to unloose their queer desire, and then also to seal it, and also to clasp it to their bosom. So I used things from the article itself that I read in order to create what I was asking them to do in the activity. And then I led into a critical discussion of the article. You won't have time for all of this kind of thing when you won't have time to do the critical questions as much. I mean, maybe you'll do that as your whole thing, but you can't really ask your classmates too many critical questions because they will not have read the article. So you have to ask them questions that they can answer without having read the article, but that relates to the article in a way that you can tell them about the article and teach them about the article through the questions that they're answering in the discussion you're having. So just a little bit of an example of something I've done in the past that might be helpful to you. I really wonder how long this is. I don't even know how long I've been talking, but it's sort of, I think it's enough. I hope it's not too much. I'm going to see you tomorrow morning. I have a ton of other stuff to do, but so yeah, for tomorrow, like I said in the message I put on UB Learn, we are just going to talk about those 3 articles. We are slightly behind, but we're not too behind because of making this video. And I actually might make more videos because that might allow me to not be behind and us not to be behind. So like I said in the UB Learns post, the rest of the articles we're going to try to do for Wednesday, except for, sadly, the Laugh of the Medusa. It's too much to try to do in one day, and it's ridiculous of me to even pretend that we're going to be able to get to it. So if someone wants to read the Laugh of the Medusa for their presentation, you don't have to do it Friday because you didn't have any time this weekend to even think about it, unless you really want to, in which case shorter presentations will be on Friday. So if someone wants to do it Friday, it's open to you. But other than that, we can move the Laugh of the Medusa. I'll start to, actually, what I would love for you to do if you really want to do that article is to tell me what week you think it should be, what category you think it can go under, in addition to the category for this week. So we'll talk about the category actually in class tomorrow. And I think I'm going to wrap it up. I hope this recording works. And I will see you in class tomorrow. And I hope everyone had a good weekend. And thank you for your kind wishes about my father. He lives.